So what I wanted to do here was take a day to focus on indie comics, and I figured if I'm going to jump into this realm, why not start with the most successful independent comic book franchise of all time, Spawn. So the roots of Spawn actually come as fallout from the relationship between comic book creators and comic book publishing companies. Also, before we start this video, I just want to say that no, Todd Mcfarlane and Seth MacFarlane are not related to one another. Having said that, if you recall my video on Howard the Duck, we had talked about how Steve Gerber's lawsuit against Marvel over the ownership of Howard set the standard for defining a new relationship between creators, writers, and comic book publishers. To sidetrack for a second, prior to Steve Gerber, most all comic book creators were considered workers for hire. What this means is that they're basically contractors that can work for Marvel, DC, or any number of other comic book publishing companies. At the time that Steve Gerber worked for Marvel, the relationship between creators and comic book publishers was one-sided, in that when a creator's work was handed over to appear in a comic, their rights to that character went with it. When Steve Gerber had created Howard the Duck in 1973 and was fired for his inability to meet deadlines in 1978, the rights to Howard the Duck stayed with Marvel. And so in 1980, when Steve Gerber learned that Marvel intended to capitalize on Howard's incredible popularity by launching a film, Steve Gerber filed a lawsuit alleging that he was the creator and sole owner of the character. While Steve Gerber would go on to lose his lawsuit, the fallout allowed for the creation of something called a Creator's Bill of Rights. Although creators were still maintained under work-for-hire laws, among the rights outlined in the Creator's Bill of Rights was profit sharing. Where creators were previously paid a set amount based on their popularity and their ability to bargain, under the Creator's Bill of Rights, content creators now had the ability to share in the profits of sales relating to their work. Transitioning back to Todd McFarlane, this system of profit sharing was one of the contributing factors that led to his leaving Marvel and DC and subsequent creation of Spawn. In 1979, when Todd McFarlane tried to enter the comic book scene, his efforts came in the form of around 700 pinup submissions spanning the course of several months, which were sent to both DC and Marvel. While most rejected his work, DC's editor and talent coordinator Sal Amendola responded to McFarlane by informing him that rather than sending in pinups, he should send in a short series written and designed by McFarlane himself. To this end, in 1981, he wrote and drew a story called Coyote. Centering on a Native American orphan following the death of his parents during a nuclear test, the story followed the young man as he eventually became a were-coyote able to shapeshift, turn invisible by performing a ritual, all while living in the desert and killing those who entered his domain. While not the greatest of plots, the story was submitted to Uncanny X-Men editor Ann Nocenti, who handed the publication over to Archie Goodwin and Joe Duffy. Publishing the title under Marvel's Epic imprint, a precursor to the adult-oriented lineup found in Marvel Max, Steve Englehart reached out to Todd McFarlane and offered him a position as an artist. With his work officially on the landscape of a major publication, between 1985 and 1987, Todd McFarlane drew for both DC and Marvel. Working as a cover illustrator and artist alongside a veritable who's who of writers including Peter David, Mike W. Barr, and David Michelini, Todd McFarlane's 2-year run included Batman Year 2, a 4-part story in the pages of Detective Comics issues 575 through 578, as a follow-up to Frank Miller's critically acclaimed Batman Year 1, as well as The Incredible Hulk issues 331 through 345. Because his depiction of comic book characters brought a level of detail that had only been seen by a handful of artists like John Byrne, McFarlane's art style garnered him a massive fan following. As a result, in 1988, Todd McFarlane was assigned to Marvel's flagship character with Amazing Spider-Man issue number 298. Continuing a style of detailed art combined with a sort of surrealism in character design, under Todd McFarlane, Spider-Man's physical appearance and webbing were given a bit of a darker and grittier appearance, something that was adored by fans at the time. Furthermore, by 1990, McFarlane was able to negotiate his way into becoming writer and artist for a separate series titled Spider-Man, with issue number 1 selling 2.5 million copies. However, by 1991, the fallout from Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck lawsuit and the stance that creators should maintain complete control over their work had reached a fever pitch. While creators were sharing in the profits of comic sales, the percentage paid was only a small fraction of what companies were making. Moreover, because the work by Todd McFarlane among others were being marketed heavily, including the release of variant covers spurring record sales, the pay of Todd McFarlane and others largely remained unchanged in that they were making the same money as individuals whose comics weren't selling that well. As a result, alongside Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Eric Larson, Jim Valentino, and Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane founded Image Comics. Under the new brand, Image had 2 main rules. Creators would maintain complete ownership of their work, allowing them to take their products with them when they left, and as an extension of the first rule, the second rule was that Image Comics would not interfere creatively or financially with the efforts of creators. In a 1992 interview with the Comic Journal, Todd Mcfarlane had stated that with Image Comics officially formed, the company needed a flagship character to launch the brand. Because relatable characters and anti-heroes were something fans seemed to latch onto and were the highest sellers, McFarlane sought to combine both by introducing a normal man thrust into an insane situation who would fight for the same things as heroes, but take a darker approach. And taking place in the first 4 issues titled Questions, the origin story of Spawn is originally given to us in bits and pieces. And what I mean here is that the story simply picks up with Spawn on Earth having no idea who he is or what happened to him. As he explains, flashbacks occur periodically but only provide fragments of information. In his first flashback, he sees the images of an unknown woman along with his funeral. But as the images come into sharper view and he begins to recollect his own funeral, he comes to the realization that 5 years have passed since his funeral and the present moment, with the woman he's seeing in the flashbacks being his wife, although he doesn't remember her name. Coming to the conclusion that the only way for him to actually piece his life back together and understand what happened to him rests in locating and visiting his wife, he sets out to locate and speak with her. Following this, Spawn has a flashback where he recalls that after dying, a bargain was struck with a demon named Malboja who granted him powers, but at the price of his soul. At this point, he begins experimenting with his abilities. Realizing that he can use his powers to change his appearance, Spawn morphs his face into a younger person. But after realizing that he can't change his appearance back to the way he used to, he begins to lash out. Changing back into his decrepit form, he has a third flashback. While the first vision was about a woman and the second was about selling his soul to a demon, the third vision is about a man that he remembers named Jason Wynn. What we're told is that Jason Wynn had initially served as a mentor to Spawn. Under the tutelage of Jason Wynn, Spawn learned to become an expert killer in the military and later as part of the CIA. However, as his time engaging in Black Ops missions increased, he began to realize that rather than performing legitimate actions on behalf of the government, instead he was helping to cover up illegal activities. And so when Spawn confronted Jason about his actions, he learned that not only was he right, but Jason seemed to enjoy the pain that he was causing others. Now following this flashback, Spawn passes out, and after waking up, comes face to face with the Violator. Now initially, we're not given any information on why the Violator is here or what his purpose is. But as he's presented to us, the Violator seems to be a comedic element in the Spawn series. Making a series of off-color remarks, the Violator prepares to tell Spawn why he's there, but begins to descend into a discussion on the various ways that he could kill him. In addition to this, the goofy nature of the Violator is expanded on when he reveals that he has to use a bathroom in the middle of his explanation and seemingly defecates in the alleyway. After finishing and continuing his explanation on how dangerous he is, Spawn becomes fed up and simply walks away. Shortly after though, Spawn realizes that the name of the woman he was looking for is actually Wanda Blake. Piecing his memories of Jason Wynn together, Spawn realizes that as a former employee of the CIA, the organization would have a complete file on himself as well as Wanda. After going to the offices and taking the file, he begins to skim through and realizes that Wanda had moved from her parents' house in Staten Island to Queens, New York. Traveling to Queens and changing his entire appearance, he approaches the house of Wanda, and after ringing the doorbell and meeting Wanda face to face since his death, he finds himself both stunned and enamored about how beautiful she is. Claiming to be part of an organization called the SPLA, which is a stand-in for the real-world group the ASPCA, he uses the excuse that his reason for being there is to offer a licensing option for the family pet should they become lost. However, partway through their conversation, Wanda is met with the arrival of her daughter. Realizing that the diagnosis from doctors of their inability to have children when he was alive was due to the fact that Spawn couldn't produce children, he becomes overwhelmed by this fact and collapses. After coming to, he finds himself in the living room of Wanda's house, at which point we get a little more backstory on the aftermath of Spawn's death and the life of Wanda Blake. What we're told is that Spawn's real name is Al Simmons, and that the report issued to Wanda was that he died in the line of duty. However, because he had been part of the CIA, the specifics of his death were never revealed due to issues of national security. Furthermore, during the 5 years between the time Al Simmons died and the current moment, Wanda and his best friend Terry Fitzgerald grieved together and during the time, fell in love, at which point they produced a child named Cyan. Referring to Wanda but using a non-existent person as a stand-in, Simmons states that he was married once but that he and his wife had gone separate ways and that she doesn't know anything about him anymore. Furthermore, rather than getting in the way and intruding in her new life, Simmons ends the conversation by walking away and wishing the two a good afternoon. Following the revelation that Wanda had started over and that his life as it stands now is a shadow of his former self and that he's destined to isolation, Spawn swears vengeance against Malboja in stating that all he wanted was to be with his wife again. However, during his rant, Spawn's interrupted by the return of the Violator. Having previously been on a series of murders in the city of New York, the Violator killed his victims by ripping their hearts out of their chests. Engaging in a battle with Spawn, the Violator tears his heart from his chest, but realizes that Spawn has power given to him directly by Malebolgia, allowing him to live without a human heart. After engaging in a brutal and violent battle in an alleyway, the Violator explains that the reason he's there is to monitor Spawn and teach him how to use his powers. What he also says is that Spawn seems to be some measure of the chosen one in the eyes of Malebolgia, although we don't know how. Beginning as lessons to Spawn on the use of his abilities, the Violator and Spawn engage in a vicious battle in the alley that costs Spawn his arm. However, the conflict's broken up with the arrival of Malebolgia himself. As he explains, the purpose of Al Simmons being transformed into Spawn was to lead Malebolgia's army of condemned souls against God. Because Al Simmons killed so many people when he was alive, and because he possessed a combination of ruthlessness, brashness, and arrogance, combined with his atheism, when he died, his soul was captured by Malebolgia. While later appearances of Spawn would show him having godlike abilities, in the early comics, Spawn had the ability to project energy to heal from almost any injury and shapeshift. But these abilities came with a caveat. Either he can use his powers against Malebolgia, attempting to end villainy, which will result in his powers burning out and his soul being damned for eternity, or he can refuse to use his powers and do nothing, which would lead to damnation if Malebolgia is successfully able to take over the world and destroy God. And so as Malebolgia prepares to leave, he confines a Violator to his human form due to the fact that his series of murders is keeping criminals cautious, and because of that, they're not killing each other and expanding Malebolgia's army. And so as Malebolgia departs and the origin story of Spawn comes to a close, Spawn dons a hat and a trench coat, taking time to soak in the events and determining whether or not he'll fight for or against Malebolgia. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and let me know what other kind of independent comic books you guys are interested in seeing. And now we'll catch you guys later. Peace.